Hi, so this afternoon I want to talk about a particular combat that took place on the 31st of August 1940 involving 19 Squadron that was based at Falmere, the satellite station of Duxford, in 12 Group. So on that day, early in the morning, there's big plots building up over the Pas-de-Calais, and these raids head out across the Channel to attack targets north of the Thames estuary, primarily Debden Airfield and Duxford. So it's a big panic takeoff, and 19 Squadron, David Cox remembered running out to his Spitfire, and he's just got his jacket on over his pyjamas, and of course it's all high altitude, it's very cold up there. So it was a real panic takeoff, and bombs start falling on Falmere, and there are some bell tents wrecked, and the ground crews are running for cover. I mean, this is a proper raid, so it is a big panic. So at the time, 19 Squadron were operating these cannon-armed Spitfires, which were a problem because the Messerschmitt 109 at the time, the German fighter, Spitfire's main adversary, had got certain technical advantages over the Spitfire. It had got a constant speed propeller, which means that the angle of it can be rotated and the optimum setting selected by the pilot for any given combat situation. Whereas at the time, our Spitfires had a 2-pitch propeller, so that means it was coarse or fine pitch. And then there was a bit of another panic in the Battle of Britain when the constant speed unit that allowed for this propeller to turn round was fitted to the aircraft actually in the field on the squadrons as an emergency measure. So that was one thing. It's also got fuel injection. Spitfire's got a gravity-fed float carburettor, so it used the Merlin engine cut out in the dive. So the 109 would always be able to fly faster in a dive because its engine didn't cut out. And more importantly, it had got two 20mm Oerlikon cannon. Now, a cannon shell is as big as your fist and has got serious hitting and destructive power, whereas the Spitfires and Hurricanes had 8 303 Browning machine guns that fired a rifle caliber bullet, and you need a lot of those bullets to shoot down a German bomber that were becoming increasingly armoured. So we need the cannon. Now the problem is that the Spitfire has a very thin wing section, and the way the cannon is designed is it's 9 foot long, this thing, so the cannon is going way back into the wing, and to accommodate it within the thin wing section, the cannon is mounted on its side with chutes to feed the ammunition from ammunition trays. Now the problem with this is that's not what the manufacturer intended. Hispano Suiza, the manufacturer, intended for the cannon to be mounted upright and to be fed by a drum. Now this obviously isn't possible in a wing section such as this. So the difficulty was when the aircraft's in the air and in combat and engaging in some quite aggressive and physical manoeuvres, the wing is flexing, and this led to the feed from the ammunition tray being flexed and the shells jamming. So the great problem that this caused is not only did sometimes one or both of the guns jam when the pilots got into action, but because there was no backup armament, there were only the 2 cannons in these Spitfire 1Bs. If one or both of the guns jammed, the pilot got no defence when both of his cannons jammed. So it was a real issue, and it was problematic because the pilots were quickly losing confidence in these aircraft because of the frequency of the stoppages. There were even arguments on the squadron with the armament section and the pilots, and it was really becoming quite an unhappy situation. But everybody knew that to a degree it had to be persevered with because we needed the cannon so badly. So it had to be trialled, it had to be sorted. And on the 31st of August 1940, there was one aircraft on the squadron, X4231, that was the first aircraft with the B wing, which had two Browning machine guns in each wing and the cannon. So the great advantage to that is if a cannon jams, the pilot still got backup of the machine guns. And later this would in fact become standard. So in later marks of Spitfire, the gun button on the control column was oblong and it was raised so the pilot could select either machine gun, cannon, or cannon and machine gun. So this is clever stuff, but this is where it all started. On 19 Squadron, having to experiment with this, and the pilot's been frustrated. But on this particular day, the squadron is scrambled, this big panic, and Flying Officer James Coward is leading green section when they end up in a big combat and they're shot down by ME-110s. So Jimmy Coward ends up going over the side. I'm going to read more about him in a minute. We'll come back to Jimmy Coward. And my great friend Frank Brinsden, who was an absolutely brilliant bloke. Frank was also shot down, takes to his parachute, descends safely. He gets away with it. 19-year-old Ray Aberhart is shot up and crash lands back at Falmere without flaps and is sadly killed. So Ray Aberhart is now buried at Whittlesford Churchyard, not far from Duxford, where there are actually a couple of other 19 Squadron pilots from the Battle of Britain period buried in the churchyard there. So we've got 3 Spitfires lost, 1 pilot killed, Jimmy is very badly wounded, as we'll come on to, and Frank manages to survive. And this is Falmere today. It's still an airfield, and this Nissen hut here is what is now the Falmere Airfield Museum, run by Mark Donagain and Dave Izzard, who do a brilliant job. They've got a Facebook page. They're volunteers. Get over to the Facebook page, give them some support. CV19, it's a problem for all of us, isn't it? Particularly these small museums. So when we're able, let's go and visit. Let's give the boys a bit of support. But Falmere, what an incredibly atmospheric place it is. So, returning to Jimmy Coward, when I wrote the Spitfire book, which is the lump that's the 19 Squadron Battle of Britain period history, and the advantage I had was knowing all of the surviving pilots. So I've got all of their accounts and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to read you this, because the first time I read this from Jimmy Coward, I was just astonished, quite honestly. But he's talking now about, you know, his guns. He says that this was very annoying because a shot came through the side of the cockpit. I think from the leader of the section I was attacking. From the holes in my trouser leg, it seemed to have come in from an angle of about 45 degrees ahead. All I felt was a hard kick in the shin. I almost didn't glance down, but I had a quick shufty to see what it was and was astonished to see my bare foot sitting on the rudder bar. The shoe and sock had just disappeared. It was still held on by some muscles and ligaments, but I had only time for a quick look because my aircraft was going out of control. The controls to the elevators had gone and the aircraft was going into a surprisingly steepening dive. I undid my straps and was sucked out of the cockpit at about 450 knots. My parachute got caught on the back of the cockpit and my arms were flung back along the side of it. My gloves were blown off and my foot was thrashing around my knee, which was quite painful. I was suddenly blown free and found myself falling head over heels, which was also painful. I pulled the ripcord pretty quickly, and when my parachute opened, I was swinging in a big figure of 8 with this wonderful view of Cambridgeshire. I was over 20,000 feet and it was a beautiful clear day. I could see about 100 miles in all directions. It was absolutely wonderful, and there wasn't the slightest sound of an aeroplane anywhere. I was alone in the sky, everything had gone. Quite extraordinary. I suddenly realised something was happening, so looked down to see blood spurting from my leg and also falling in a big figure of 8. I realised I had to do something quickly. I had my helmet on, with the radio cord hanging down, so I put that around my thigh, latching it up with a half hitch and tightening it until I stopped the bleeding. I then found that holding my knee hard back under my shoulder, I could keep the foot wedged under my bottom, which stopped the foot twisting about and was more comfortable. I then floated slowly across the sky. So, cutting a long story short, Jimmy Coward lands by parachute in a field not far from Duxford, and his foot is virtually shot off. And essentially what he's done is he saved his own life by tying a tourniquet using his radio lead from his helmet around his thigh on the way down. And the nonchalant way that account is written about, oh yes, well, this was quite painful. Well, I should think it was. You're flapping about in a cockpit like that. Unbelievable. What a generation. And I think that a really brilliant thing about the Jimmy Coward story is that Jimmy Coward was such a cheerful man. He was always laughing. He survived this. He had his foot amputated. He went on Churchill's staff, and he never flew operationally again. But he was a raconteur, and he was always so happy and so cheerful. And I think that we can take something from that. I mean, we look today, the most famous wartime veteran survivor today has to be Colonel Sir Captain Tom Moore. And what a remarkable personality he is, and epitomises that generation. And these people, and Jimmy Coward particularly, I think, sort of personifies that spirit that they had and the kind of people that they were. Many years after Jimmy was shot down, somebody excavated the crash site of his Spitfire and kindly gave me these little bits and pieces. So we've got bits of airframe there, and this is a lump of engine. And particularly interesting is one of the troublesome cannon's shells. So this is a high explosive round, a solid ball round, and that's going to make a big mess when it hits somebody. And this is the shell case that fits in. So you can see the sort of size of this. I mean, this is nearly as big as your fist. And you won't be able to see it from there. But in the end bit there, the date on this is 1939, so that's very rare. And that is a real relic from one of these rare Spitfire Mark 1Bs that 19 Squadron had at Duxford. And interestingly, the aircraft were actually replaced shortly after this because the pilots had really lost all confidence with them. And Air Chief Marshal Dowding, the boss of Fighter Command himself, flew over to Falmere to have a chat with the pilots, and they persuaded him that the cannons just had to go. So the Mark 1Bs were replaced with Spitfire Mark 1As from a training unit. These are just the ordinary 8 machine gun armed Spitfires, and the Cannon 1Bs went off, and eventually the problem was resolved by the Air Fighting Development Unit and the engineers at Vickers. So the Spitfire did get the cannon, and a lot of the angst and trials and tribulations that 19 Squadron went through during the first half of the Battle of Britain with these aircraft went a long way to helping iron out those problems. But Jimmy Coward, what a story, what a man, what a generation.